August 2005. A hurricane off the southern coast of the United States is heading for New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina, a Category 5, will be a killer. Citizens are ordered to flee. But there's one group of people, 7,000 of them, who are not allowed to leave.
Every day, it looked like the water was getting higher and higher.
And I didn't think there was no dry land nowhere. We panicked. Anybody would panic.
There was no drinking water, there was no food, and it was hot as hell, and nobody had a clue what was going on. For 4 days, this is how it was. For 4 days, this is how it was.
Staff faced a riot.
They were shaking on the bars, they were setting fires, they were screaming, they were popping their cells, coming out of their cells.
You were about to come face to face with killers who were afraid and who were angry.
Vital forensic evidence stored in this courthouse basement was destroyed, contaminated by floodwater. The justice system, already close to breakdown, collapsed.
Katrina blew the system apart, and it made it such that we were so disconnected that we simply could not function.
In the chaos of Katrina, the prisoners were left behind. In its aftermath, their rights withheld. Their story has never been told.
They basically abandoned the prison.
We just was left there to die.
August the 28th, the day before Katrina. Those who can leave. City leaders are left to deal with the rest.
What about the parish prisoners, the prisoners in the jail? What about the prisoners? Yes. What about the prisoners in the jail right now? Will they just simply stay in the jail?
Excuse me, Governor. We have backup generators. We're fully staffed. We're under our emergency operations plan, so we're only, and we've been working with the police department, so we're going to keep our prisoners where they belong.
Sheriff Marlin Guzman, the man in charge. While the rest of the city was to leave, his prisoners, nearly 7,000 men and women, would stay. Orleans Parish Prison is a vast clearinghouse with 10 jail blocks, its own courts and a morgue. On the day of Katrina, a third of its inmates were awaiting trial, innocent until proven guilty. New arrivals had swelled its numbers. Some only just arrested, some brought from other prisons to shelter there or to appear in court. Rapists, killers, hardened lifers.
My name is Andrew Joseph Jr. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm doing a life sentence for first-degree murder. I've been incarcerated for 27 years and 13 days and about 6 hours.
Where were you when Katrina struck?
Orleans Parish Prison on the 2nd floor. The officers came and they told us, they said, and we got a bad storm heading this way and we think it's going to hit in the city. We thought all this was a game, but it was not.
Andrew Joseph had been brought to New Orleans for a court appearance. He'd applied for a reduction to his sentence.
That night when the storm came, we didn't even know it had come. See, this is a very secured building. You don't hear all this noise and stuff, you know. So when we woke up the next morning, we saw water, about 3 feet of water.
And it was stable water. It wasn't water that was running out. It was just doing this, and it wasn't going anywhere. We didn't know what was going on. It was very scary.
Joseph's cellmate, Walter Quinn, already served 35 years for rape, 3 on death row. Quinn too was hoping for early release, but on Monday, August the 29th, there was no court.
As the day progressed, the water levels start coming higher, start getting higher. The water was so high, it had uncovered the whole bottom floor, all the way up. It was devastating, the way the water came up on us like that.
Look at that wind, listen to that wind, baby, look at that wind.
Each of the prison buildings was soon cut off as the city's levees crumbled and water flooded in. This was filmed by one of the guards.
When the water came, it rose so fast, everybody got trapped. Here come tons of water at you. You just wiped out everything. Where I was, we had water, and they moved us to a higher level.
So where was it up to on you when they moved you?
When I first moved, I was up to here.
First the power failed, then the backup generators. Cell blocks were left with no light, no air, and no communications.
Look at this, now this is the eye of the storm.
In the largest prison block, Sheriff's deputy Rhonda Ducre was on duty, 4 months pregnant.
When Katrina did hit, I worked the 3rd floor. We lost power, we didn't have any phone, we didn't have any communication at all. Our hallways were flooded, tables were flying back and forward. I had a flashlight that ran for so long it was losing batteries. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I could not make my proper security checks because I could not see where I was going. And there was water everywhere. It was very scary. Everything was chaotic because we didn't really have a plan.
It wasn't no way we was gonna be evacuated after all, at any time, because they didn't have no evacuation plan, period. We just was left there to die.
Cardell Williams, arrested for possession of drugs, had yet to be charged. He was in Templeman 3, the worst hit block, with over 1,000 other inmates.
The water started getting high, so after the water got to our waist level, the deputies came. They did have deputies come at that point. You know what they told us? Get in your cells. And they was locking the doors. They panicked. They didn't know what to do. They panicked, and they were telling me get in the cell. So I said, I'm not getting in the cell. They had mace in their hand. I wasn't worrying about them spraying me with that mace or nothing like that. They had shotguns too when they came and talking about getting in the cell. I'm not gonna get in no cell and I see this water rise.
Vincent Norman did go in his cell, 1 level up. He's a chef. He'd been locked away a few days before for an unpaid fine of $70.
The whole bottom floor was covered with water. Looked like a pool. You couldn't even see the stairs or the tables or the bottom cells anymore. It looked like nothing but just water. Like you just had the top level where we were, and everything else was just water. You couldn't see the floors or anything. And it was sewer water. You could see the stool floating around in there, the smell of urine. It was bad. We were already overcrowded as it was. They just stuck us 8 men to a 2-man cell. And in that situation, you're not supposed to lock anybody up because you won't be able to open the cells. And that's what happened to me. My situation was one of the ones where the cell I was in couldn't be opened.
When the power failed, the electronic doors to his cell were jammed shut, and that's how they stayed.
The cell I was in couldn't be opened, so we couldn't get out. We had washed ourselves off in the toilet, and that was our source of water for the whole duration while we was in there. We had no food. Like I said, the only source of water we had was the urinal in the toilet. That was it.
Fearing a riot, their guards began to retreat.
We asked the guys to come back. One of the guys asked one of the deputies were they gonna come back. That's when they threw 2 mace canisters in our cell and told us to shut up and get away from the cell door because we was making too much noise. We basically were just asking for some help. Mace means when they take a canister of mace and they spray you down with it. So it really eats at your skin and it burns and it's real bad. You'll come up out your clothes, you'll be naked, standing there trying to, and there has no relief for it except to wash it off, and they don't have no water. It was a trip that you could treat another human being like that, knowing what was going on outside.
That was the last time Vincent saw a guard for several days. He and his cellmates were now alone.
Just left us like dogs. It was an experience that I wouldn't wish on nobody. We just was in the cell, 8 of us in a 2-man cell. No food, no water. They had 4 white guys and 4 black guys that was in there. And, you know, we became real close. You lost a lot of your inhibitions up in there, I can tell you that much. If you had any kind of pride about using the bathroom in front of another person or sleeping next to another person, you let all that go. It became a survival. We got real close with the people you ended with because it didn't really matter what race you were because we always in the same boat. The only thing we had on our minds was survival, so we had to depend on each other.
Prison blocks now became a shelter for the families of staff trapped by the flood.
We still got a bunch of babies hanging around, a lot of babies. So this is how we're going to be made to live for the next few days, I guess however long they continue until they evacuate us.
There, with her 4 children, was Deputy Rhonda Ducray.
They thought the water was going to keep rising and rising and rising. They thought we were going to be stuck there to drown. They were asking the question. They were at, Mama, we gonna die? And that haunts them.
There's our medical staff here. They're doing everything they can.
When Katrina struck, deputies brought their families to the jail. And what you're looking at here is a porch, the veranda that surrounds the CCC building. And this is where we lived for the week of the storm. So progressively, this whole area filled up more and more until you just really couldn't tramp around without stepping on someone's body.
We've got plenty of women and children, a lot of little ones, limited water. We're rationing everything out that we can.
People got sick. People got sick for a number of reasons. Some of them got sick from the heat and from lack of water. There were a lot of dehydration injuries. Asthma was flaring terribly in the heat. The boat drivers were coming in and they'd been driving the boats for days without breaks. And I was seeing for the first time in my medical career cases of trench foot, where the skin was literally peeling off the deputies' feet and muscles.
Now we do have food. Some have none. And some people have none. Some people have nothing here.
Food and drinking water were running out. Half the inmates were on medication. Most went without.
Anybody would panic to be without food and water and medication for that long a period of time. I'm a diabetic and high blood pressure, you see. So what that meant was that without high blood pressure medicine and without diabetic medicine, then I had a sickness that set in on me that was kind of like devastating for me, okay? And diabetics has to eat, so there was no food. Well, I felt like I wanted to throw up all the time. My nerves was on edge, very, very angry.
By late Monday, the storm was over. But inside, the water kept coming, and prisoners had no idea why.
It looked like the water was getting higher and higher. The water was maybe 2 or 3 feet from reaching where we were. It caused a panic among the guys to try to do whatever they can to get out of the place.
With their guards gone, inmates assumed they'd been abandoned.
The people that was on the tier with me, they just panicked. You ever saw a man that was afraid? I mean, really afraid. See like this iron here? I saw him pull iron balls loose. Fear. If I wouldn't have seen it, I'd never believe that. Everybody just went crazy. Shook their iron. I don't want to die, I don't want to die, screaming and hollering. Okay? Because that's what, to them, that's what it meant, imminent death.
Jean Chatinier, 53 years old, arrested a week before. It wasn't the flood he feared, but his fellow inmates.
We had no deputies left in Orleans Parish Prison in that unit. So it was a riot. They broke people out of the cells, they broke into the property room, they broke into the deputies' lockers. Stabbing, fighting, kicking, jumping on and beating them half to a pulp. I mean, 8, 9 guys on one guy. I'm gonna get mine, I'm gonna get mine. And I'd say there was about 250, 300 people up there. There was only about 8 of us that were white. And the whole time they're running through, spitting on us, saying we're gonna kill the white boys, all this kind of stuff, kicking at us and all this stuff. You're sitting there and you don't know if somebody's gonna walk up and kick you in the mouth. Just because you're sitting there, they feel like hitting somebody. It was chaos. I mean, we thought we were gonna die because nobody was there to stop anything.
They were shaking on the bars, they were setting fires, they were screaming, they were popping their cells, coming out of their cells. It was dangerous.
We was beating on the wall, we broke all the glass out, we pried some of the balls and beat on the wall. We just made noise, everybody. But it just was falling on deaf ears.
With no staff around, old-timers like Andrew Joseph tried to protect the vulnerable.
Some of the things from the inmates was really bad because they was trying to molest some of the young kids that I had been teaching church to. Okay, so I had a problem with that part of it.
Between AJ and me, we was the 2 oldest guys on the tier. And we was both old enough to be their grandfather probably.
So we all combined in one cell, all of us that was in this little group. And we would tie the door at night to keep anybody from infiltrating.
Well, I mean, we just prayed. We prayed and tried to keep the guys' spirits up by having little fellowship meetings and so forth in the cells and trying to give them hope to let them know that, man, we're going to be all right, you know.
And for me to crack up in the front of them would have caused them to crack up. So what they did, they just hung around me like they were drawing strength. And I didn't even know what was going on. See?
Fearing they'd been forgotten, inmates tried to attract attention. When that failed, they started breaking out.
Then that hole that you see that look like a window, that's not actually a window. That's a hole that we beat through. And they still ain't sending us no help. So guys begin to jump. So some guys is jumping and, you know, they went to jumping. One guy got caught on that barbed wire over there. He chopped, because all his stuff was cut up. And one guy they shot coming out that window.
To stop a mass breakout, deputies were ordered to shoot on sight.
Inmates had broken out of windows and climbed on top of the roofs, and you could see deputies firing shots. Now, I've never seen anybody fall, so I don't know whether they were shooting beanbag guns, whether they were shooting rubber bullets. To my knowledge, nobody was actually shot, but there were plenty of shots that was fired.
The jail was being trashed. Staff had lost control, and prisoners were escaping. 36 hours on, Sheriff Marlin Gussman, the man who'd decided they'd stay in the jail, was forced to admit his promised backup plans had failed. He had no choice but to rethink.
Well, Monday evening, I said we had to evacuate. The buildings were dark, suffocating, and just not a good place to be. And we wanted to get them, where they would be in a better place.
But how? The city was already at full stretch, rescuing ordinary civilians. Moving the prisoners now would be much harder. The man Gussman turned to lived 3 hours north. A legend. Burl Cain, the governor of one of America's toughest prisons, Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola.
This phone would not work at Katrina. I had absolutely no, look at all the phones and telephones in here. Nothing worked. I could only talk on one radio like a walkie-talkie. So if I wanted to send a message somewhere, I had to take a runner with me like World War II. How can the satellite phone not work? How can nothing work? And this is 2005 when this is going on.
Cain summoned his posse, Angola's tactical team, and headed for the disaster zone. They were unprepared for what they'd find.
We went to New Orleans, and we found our way to get in. You know, you couldn't just drive anywhere. They had parts of the interstate was underwater and this and that. So once we got our route and figured it out how we were going to get in, we actually had to come from the West Bank and go over the bridge into the city.
Downtown, security is still the main focus. The city is an armed camp. How many weapons are still out there? This is the haul from one afternoon.
The team had come to help, yet they were dodging bullets.
And so we go in there that evening, and there's a housing project on the left. And so there, people shoot. One was from a church steeple, just from wherever, from buildings and things. We never could hardly see them. The water is what really caused the damage, but the looters were worse than the storm. The storm was Sunday night. So you can see that whole week, it was just chaos in the city. The gangs were just running rampant. They were shooting everywhere, and I realized this is how it would be with no law and order. This is like a third world country. I can't believe this is America. What is going on here?
Back in the prison, staff were desperate, trying to hold the line while waiting for help.
When we got up to do our roll call that morning, we went to our gates, and every last inmate down the tier was out in the hallway. Every last one of them. But I was assigned to the floor by myself. I was 4 months pregnant at the time, while they had 120 inmates out on each side. I was terrified. There's only a certain amount of things that I could have done if something was to go wrong. When we tried to put them back in the cell, they would not go. They refused. Who am I to stop 120 people? They could have just politely pulled me to the side or did whatever they had to do and let the rest of the inmates out. You don't stand a chance. All because they didn't have a plan. It all goes back to them not having a plan, because after all, when we do show up for work, I was the only one assigned to that floor.
Across the street from us last night, there were fires in numerous rooms. No telling what the situation over there is.
Families stranded on the jail veranda were trapped between the stinking waters outside and above them, in the upper floors of that same block, violent inmates.
The inmates sound like they're about to riot. They're all yelling and screaming. It sounds like they all came out.
We could hear them coming down towards the door. Now that building had 800 inmates in it, and there's one door separating them from us. All of a sudden, you were about to come face to face with killers who were afraid and who were angry.
Help, get us out of here, we is dying.
At that point, everyone was terrified.
This is crazy, man.
There was nothing we could do to impede them. You know, you had about 10 or 15 deputies. Half of them were women. Most of the women were armed with batons. One was armed with a curling iron. A lot of the people were crying. One of my nurses had written her name on her clothes and on her arms, her name and identifying information in case she died. So when they reached that door and began banging on it, and I really thought they were coming through, that was my scariest moment.
But the door held. Prison staff began the evacuation themselves on Tuesday morning before Kane's team arrived. Inmates were ferried by boat, 6 at a time, to an overpass, where they were told to wait, in blazing sun.
When the tactical team got to the bridge, you know, the inmates were real rowdy, and so they used the less than lethal weapons there too and got control of the bridge. That's those rubber bullets, you know, it's in a little bag. It's a bean bag and a regular shell, and it hits you and it hurts real bad. It'll make a blue spot, but it won't kill you. And you can't evacuate people and them fighting you. You know, we have to have order.
When we got to the top of that overpass, it looked like a war zone, or the closest thing that it could be to a war zone. 1,200 at the minimum inmates sitting on that overpass. When you just see that many inmates unsecured, it's just, wow. Man, what do we do next? That was hurting, that was scared, that didn't know what was going to happen in the next few minutes, didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, didn't know where they were going. We wanted everybody to just stay as calm as they could and get them out.
Nearly 7,000 prisoners were evacuated. Many couldn't swim. Some waited there 3 days with little to eat or drink before buses came to drive them away. Leaving the jail, some said they'd passed dead bodies in the darkness. Andrew Joseph says he saw one.
Well, this guy that we saw was just floating. All I knew that it was floating on its back, had a rat sitting on his stomach, you know. He didn't have no clothes on.
As the jail emptied in Templeman 3, it seemed prisoners had been forgotten 48 hours after the evacuation began. Vincent Norman was still stuck in his cell.
After hearing all the rescue work going all around you, and when you seen them leave and hearing that they had cleared out, that kind of like made you feel like, man, this is going to be our tomb. This is where I'm going to be my final resting place, and that wasn't a good thought. And we got found on the last sweep. They just happened to be making a sweep. And somebody told them that they still had people in our building. That's when they swept all the building. It let me see two sides of human nature, the caring side that people really have, and the side of which people really don't care what happens to you one way or the other. And there's a lot of that still going on in the world. We got to learn how to start getting along better than that, because nobody should have went through what we went through.
We got them out as quick as we could. We had medical attention for them. We fed them as quick as we could. God sent the hurricane. We didn't. And so therefore it was no man's fault that they were in there that long. That's just how long it took. It was their fault for breaking the law and going to jail in the first place. They'll not have been in jail, then they wouldn't have had to be there. That's how I feel about it.
It took 4 days to evacuate the prison. 13 prisoners who escaped were later recaptured, but not before one of them was rearrested for killing a man in Mississippi. The operation was declared a masterpiece of crisis management by the sheriff.
We really worked hard to get them out as quick as we could. I suspect that some of the inmates may have felt like they were neglected for some hours, for some time period, but we never left. And we always had their care, their custody as our main concern. Everybody got out safely, and no one was abandoned. No one was left behind.
We're unhappy with the leadership that we had. He not only left his staff down, he left the people of Orleans Parish down.
For Captain Alan Verrett, it was a fiasco. On duty throughout, he and other staff at the jail blamed the sheriff, from his first decision to keep the prisoners there, through every subsequent step.
He walked around like he was in a daze. I think it really affected him. I don't think he was prepared for what happened. I think he was overwhelmed. He wasn't there all the time. I mean, you would see him one day, and then he would be gone for a day, day and a half, and then you'd see him again, and that was only for a short time. He wasn't there the whole time.
He left us there. Don't know where he went, but we were still stuck in the buildings while he was gone.
Not true, according to Sheriff Guzman. He's since stood for re-election. His platform, his expert leadership as head of the jail when Katrina struck.
Katrina, the worst storm in American history and the greatest crisis ever faced by a New Orleans sheriff. Throughout the crisis, Sheriff Guzman stayed at the jail, directing this huge operation calmly and confidently with no loss of life, earning the respect of law enforcement officials everywhere. Sheriff Marlon Guzman, serving our city with courage and distinction.
We're in a crisis situation. People are basically begging for help. He's nowhere around to be found. When he comes around, he's got a camera person taking photo shots so he can run it for a campaign. Why are you thinking about a campaign or a future campaign when you ought to be thinking about saving people? I would forgive him for mistakes that he made if his heart was in the right place, but it's not. This is all about politics, Louisiana politics at best, and that's what he is, a politician.
Marlon Guzman is lying about the evacuation of Parish Prison.
There was a lot of misdeeds done.
There was no set evacuation plan.
And when it came down to crunch time where people had to make decisions, he wasn't prepared.
His rival's most serious charge was that in his prison, on his watch, people had died and he'd covered it up.
And worse, he has perpetrated the worst cover-up in New Orleans history.
When they say that Orleans Parish Prison was successfully evacuated without any deaths, that is a barefaced lie. I saw bodies as we were in Orleans Parish Prison and coming out of Orleans Parish Prison, going to the overpass. I did observe bodies, dead bodies, floating in the water face down.
Mr. Guzman, it's time to tell the truth.
Lies. Lies, lies, lies. There were so many incredulous stories that came out of this disaster that were lies and that were untruths. And you owe it to your public, to your viewers, not to sensationalize fictitious accounts by putting them out there as truth.
The full picture on that may yet emerge. But it's what happened next, in the aftermath of Katrina and after the prisoners were dispersed, that raises even more serious questions about Louisiana justice. Defense attorney Phyllis Mann tried to track the prisoners after they left New Orleans.
When everything went to hell in a handbasket in that prison down there, and it did, the cost to all of us in every possible way from this is just hard to overestimate.
She knew many had been locked up for minor offences. Some hadn't even been charged. She wanted to help get them out. But first she had to find them.
I was interviewing them in different facilities all over the state. They were held at over 42 separate places. When we started interviewing those folks, they were not okay. They hadn't eaten, they hadn't had anything to drink, they hadn't had showers, they didn't know where they were. Lots of them had just peeling skin from being sunburned. And, you know, it's just unusual in Louisiana to see a black man who is so badly sunburned that his skin is peeling. It was pretty traumatic. You know, we would ask them, do you know where your family is? And grown men would just, big old tears falling down their faces, you know. I don't know where anybody is. If you can just find out if my mom is okay.
First they came here, to Hunt Correctional Facility, where normally only those convicted and sentenced are held. It's a prison for 2,000 inmates. Now, Assistant Warden Tim Hooper had to accommodate an extra 3,000. Hooper loves his job. He's a manhunter, known for his skills in catching men who escape. When the inmates arrived from New Orleans, he took control.
I had 500 over here, and then I had about 1,200 out here on the yard. And this is where they laid down and slept at. So all this area was all inmates. When you looked out here, it was inmates. They were getting a little uproused because the kitchen's right here. You know, they see the general population eating fried chicken, and we giving them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a bologna sandwich, you know, kind of, they didn't like that too much.
But they were fed, and for some, it was their first food in days.
What they had sandwiches for us, though. Good cold drink of water, okay? So that sustained us.
There was no room inside for the evacuated prisoners, so they were corralled into one outdoor yard. Those arrested for unpaid fines found themselves next to killers and gangsters.
They had the whole prison together, so guys that had a lot of grudges against each other, a lot of stuff that was going on from the streets that had been separated once they went to jail, picked back up.
Okay, I mean, we got gangs in New Orleans. This guy got a group over here, he's got his group, so when they meet up in prison, they fight.
I seen guys stabbed. There was a lot of freaky sexual activity going on. There was a lot of guys fighting. It was just wild. It was a mob scene.
And no one knew who was who, least of all the wardens. The paperwork lost, there was no way of knowing who were the violent criminals and who had just been picked up the day before Katrina on some petty misdemeanor.
One thing you have to realize is that when we received these inmates, we had no idea who they were. There were no records that came with them. We didn't know if they were in prison for murder or for a traffic violation.
Most of them were misdemeanors. Most of them didn't do anything to deserve to be here.
When Phyllis Mann started to investigate, even she was shocked.
I can't tell you how many people we saw who were arrested for obstructing the sidewalk. This means they were asleep on the sidewalk. for public drunk, for begging. It was a common series of crimes. And what they all had in common was that they were poor, black men from New Orleans. And once they got into the jail, they couldn't get out.
The justice system ground to a halt. 6 months after Katrina, this was Phyllis Mann's assessment.
Fully half of the 8,500 or so evacuated prisoners had been arrested but had never been to court. We don't know if they're innocent or guilty. We know they're presumed to be innocent, but they have never had an opportunity, not to this day, had an opportunity to go to court and demonstrate their innocence. They don't know why they're still sitting in jail. They don't know why they're not being brought to court. They don't know who, if anyone, is representing them. They don't know even whether they are being prosecuted or not. For all they know, they're just sitting there, forgotten.
When we met Jean Chatinier there last April, 8 months after Katrina, he had no idea why he'd even been arrested.
I was arrested 8 days before the hurricane without a new charge, supposedly for an old warrant. And nobody's been able to tell me what that warrant is for, and I've been here locked up 213 days. Been through 2 riots. And I can't even get somebody to tell me, oh, here's what it was, it's a mistake, oh, we're gonna let you go. Nobody, nothing, not a soul has provided anything for us.
Locked up at Hunt, he'd missed 2 court hearings about which he knew nothing. He'd even been assigned a lawyer, Dwight Dowski. We came across one prisoner. He didn't know why he was in jail, and his name is Jean Chatinier. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't heard of Jean Chatinier.
You're not aware of him as one of your clients?
No.
Dwight Dowski is a public defender. His job is to represent those who can't afford a lawyer. That's 85% of all defendants. He and the other public defenders in New Orleans are mainly paid through a system peculiar to Louisiana, out of traffic fines.
In Orleans Parish, the reality is that since the hurricanes, we've had far fewer citizens to drive around, and the policemen who are on the job aren't out there issuing traffic tickets. They're worried about far greater things. And the result has been that we have seen our income drop to virtually nil.
Without the funds to pay them, 4 out of 5 public defenders left. Those who stayed faced an impossible caseload. And the Katrina evacuees, many of them unconvicted men, were left waiting with no news.
6 months, it's never been to court, never got a rain.
And everybody in here's got a similar story. That's why we haven't been released. I would think that you would have public defenders that would be coming up here to try to talk to us and see if they can help us. But not if they're not getting paid, they're not coming. And that's what Orleans Parish problem is. They did not pay the public defenders. They got 6 out of 39. You can't represent many people with just 6 public defenders. And they cannot bring you in front of a judge without giving you a defense. So if you don't have a lawyer that can get to a judge, you're going to sit up here.
He's already been there 7 months.
That's horrible.
And he could be another 4 or 5 months.
That's very, very possible the way the system's running. And that's what we have right now, is a system that doesn't work.
Well, we just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, hopefully God... What gets you out of jail more than anything else in Orleans Parish is the grace of God.
I got kids out there that I haven't seen since on.
Everybody sit up on your bed, count time.
The bottom line is the judges. The judges in New Orleans are the people who have authority to do something about this, to order the transport of this man to come to court, to ensure that he has a lawyer there when he gets there, to allow them time to talk so that he'll know what the heck is going on and why he's being brought to court.
This is where the evacuated prisoners were meant to appear. Orleans Parish Criminal Courthouse, the front of the prison complex. For all its grandeur, it's brought neither law nor order to a city notorious for murder. The senior judge was Calvin Johnson.
At one point in this court's history, we were trying more cases in this building than any other court in Louisiana. And we had judges in this building, including me actually, who year in and year out would try more murder trials than any other judge in America.
This is how the courthouse looked when Katrina struck. It stayed closed for 9 months, with makeshift courts elsewhere hearing only a fraction of the normal caseload, leaving judges with a backlog of over 6,000 cases.
Katrina blew the system apart, and it made it such that we were so disconnected that we simply could not function.
It seems extraordinary in a building prone to flooding, but vital forensic evidence was stored in the basement. The fate of thousands of defendants now rests on evidence in these rooms. Rape kits and weapons, fingerprint and drug samples are now contaminated beyond rescue. The guilty may go free, and the falsely convicted, who could have won reprieves, now may have no hope.
The items were all over the place because of the water. And so it was just one incredible mess. The evidence is all tagged. Without being able to read the tag, we don't know really what connection this stuff in this bag has with a particular case.
In Louisiana, rape and murder are capital crimes. For the wrongly convicted, DNA testing has been a godsend in getting convictions overturned. But if the evidence is spoilt, for those on death row, it could mean the difference between life or death.
To a great extent, that evidence has been totally destroyed, and they'll never be able to recover any DNA from it. There will be people, and I've got one in particular that I'm worried about. And if this had not happened, if they had stored the evidence in a safe place, maybe DNA would have exonerated them. Those are the people that I feel sorriest for.
I have been in jail. I know jail from both sides. And an hour in jail is like an hour spent no place else. And so we have to be sure that no one is in jail who shouldn't be in jail. Jail is for those who are supposed to be there. It's not for those who aren't.
Katrina was devastating for the whole city, scattering families everywhere. But for those who should never have been in jail, it's the injustice of their unnecessary ordeal that hurts.
This was written to my kids on the 24th of September at 4:00 a.m. God bless my children, hold them tight. They need you to be their strength, their might. God bless my children, keep them safe and warm. Keep them close to you, away from harm. God bless my children with sweet dreams. Tell them not to give up, no matter how tough it seems. God bless my children. Tell them mommy loves them. It won't be long. Father bless us, send me home.
Venus Augustine spent 131 days in jail, one of 670 women locked up in New Orleans that night. Her house too was destroyed. It took 4 months for charges against her to be dropped. Only then could she rejoin her 4 children and try to rebuild her life from this hotel room.
Nobody was prepared to see what they saw. Nobody was prepared to starve for 4 days. Nobody was prepared to not be able to drink water for 4 days or contact your family. You know what I mean? This is a major catastrophe, and nobody had a clue what was going on. I thought my whole family was dead. That's what I thought. As you can see, I have 4 kids and a fiance. I was not reunited with my fiance until
October the 3rd, he didn't have a clue where I was. I didn't know where he was. From August 26th till October the 3rd, I never heard from him.
I gotta find all my DVDs, hammer him.
The government has been paying for their room, but today the money runs out.
I'm about to stay in this bed up here and take it out
No, don't stand the bed up now, please.
Corruption, just one of the city's many vices, has now swallowed much of the emergency fund which was meant for Katrina's victims. Venus has had enough. For her, the city's charms have gone.
This stroller, these beads. Julie, you want somebody to grab
You guys, when you leave here, be careful. I mean, you could go to jail for jaywalking for 10 days. Simply crossing the street. As an adult, I realized that New Orleans is really not the place to be. It's called Sin City, and there's a reason for that. It is Sin City. It's a city that never sleeps. Sin City. They breed corruption. That's what it's built on, corruption. It's America's playground.
Today, the population of the city is less than half what it was. And down, too, are the murders. From 22 a month before the hurricane, down to a rate of 2 in the following 3 months. Where the law enforcers failed, Katrina scored.
The hurricane did wonders as far as getting rid of criminals. It took a lot of the killers and drug dealers out of the city of New Orleans. Our crime rate has been slashed, and that's because many of the criminals are not here in the city of New Orleans.
Eddie Jordan is the New Orleans district attorney, the city prosecutor. He's an elected man who campaigns on a ticket of law and order, and here in Louisiana, that means the death penalty.
The death penalty is the law of Louisiana. I've sought the death penalty in every case in which the defendant is death penalty eligible, and that is my position as the district attorney. We have the death penalty in the state of Louisiana, but we have not imposed it in Orleans Parish.
For 9 years, juries in this, what was a predominantly black city, have refused to sentence people to death. Now, this may change.
There's been a huge demographic shift in New Orleans. You know, before the hurricane, New Orleans was a majority black city. Now, what you have is you have a lot of middle-class white folks. And upper-class white juries are more apt to impose the death penalty.
All that puts an even greater strain on the few remaining public defenders who are already overwhelmed.
Once Katrina hit and we had to lay off staff, I started handling 600 regular cases, felony cases, and my caseload in terms of death penalty cases has ballooned to 42, 43, 44 cases, depending on the day right now. On that, and that's so far without another attorney to help. To the individual attorney, sometimes it seems like the only ethical thing that you could do would be to quit.
Angola Prison is where Louisiana sends those convicted of serious crimes. Those not on death row are sentenced to hard labor. Their jail terms so long, most will never be released.
So those of you that are Christians, think rehabilitation. Think about loving your brother. Think about praying for each other. This is the Reverend AJ on the station that kicks behind the bricks This is the incarceration station, the only one in the nation. Enjoy the music, and I'll be back with you later.
After 27 years in jail, Andrew Joseph is one of Angola's trusted inmates. He hopes one day he'll be released. But here, life means life. That hasn't cut the record murder rate, and it's now acknowledged many innocent men have been wrongly convicted, yet judges persist in handing out long, harsh sentences.
Locking everyone up for longer and longer and longer doesn't make you safe for tomorrow morning. If everybody's daddy goes to prison, and if mama's struggling to make ends meet, it just becomes a way of life. By imposing these long sentences, we sort of set people up to be reoffenders. And so, you know, this sort of pattern of crime just continues and continues and continues. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy we've created in here.
This is Brian. This is my son, biological son. It's sad to say, but, you know, he followed my footsteps in a sense. A lot of stuff that went down with him is not true, but, you know, Louisiana is a hard place to deal with. Okay, so he's here. But we have a great relationship, you know. And he worked right here, and he lived right down from me, so we have constant communication all the time. And he's got his head on right, I'm glad of that.
Andrew Joseph's son was convicted on 33 charges of robbery and kidnapping.
I didn't tell you the bad part about that. He's got 6 life sentences and 349 years. Sad.
Each of the Katrina prisoners has a different story. What they all share is a bankrupt justice system on which Katrina lifted the lid. Jean Chatenier served 233 days without knowing why. He was released on the 31st of May. Cardell Williams spent 2 months in jail, during which he was never charged. Vincent Norman stayed 103 days. He should have been released after 7. Marlin Guzman was re-elected as criminal sheriff. Andrew Joseph is still hoping his sentence will be reduced. If it's not, he's unlikely ever to leave Angola.
Oh, black water, far as I can see. Oh, black water is closing in on me.
Have your say on tonight's show and explore a world of extra information, news stories and features by visiting our website at bbc.co.uk/thisworld.